that's what we're seeing here. So this complex geometry is in part hanging from this grid, and the grid has been deformed into a catenary curve so that it indicates that it is a real mass. Now, we have two copies. We have stereo. One of our associates on the West Coast happened to live outside Seattle. This is, again, 12 years ago. He was ordering frames from NSSDC. There were people there apparently like Ken Johnston. Knowing that we were looking, they kept slipping the good stuff out the back door. We kept getting amazing imagery. We have now found that there are 12 separate versions of this supposedly one NASA negative called 4822. 12 separate versions. Yeah, NASA has not been leveling with us big time. And what's critical on this version, you can see the aspect ratio again of this object has changed, and now you're looking at it more end-on so that it's been foreshortened. This object obviously is much nearer and is much farther away, so it hasn't changed very much. The distance between here and here is just about the same here. But this grid all around it is what's causing the scattering, curve. You don't see the cable on this aspect because it's coming more toward the camera, but it's obviously the same object, and yes, there is stereo, and yes, it confirms that all this is real. It is physically sitting above the moon. And if Ken had not been able to report a first-person eyewitness testimony that they were mechanically painting this stuff out, I would be much more hesitant to be as firm as I am this morning about what's there. But not only do we have the evidence, we also now have the means that they've been using to keep it from all the rest of us. This is now an overexposure of another version showing the castle here. Notice this, what I call the prairie fire effect, which is the glass grid which has been beaten and beaten and beaten by micrometeoroids. It's thin up here, it gets denser and denser as you go down toward the surface, exactly consistent with a physical glass grid above the moon, consistent with Fairtex computerized reconstruction. This part is cool. This is so astonishing, because science is nothing if it is not prediction. If I have glass-like remains sticking up on various parts of the moon, and I look at objects as I'm coming over the horizon and they're rising through it, rising behind it, if it's glass, if it's an optically transparent medium, it has to refract light. It has to bend light. It has to distort whatever is behind it. Lo and behold, on Apollo 10, we see this incredible distortion of the Earth rising behind the lunar horizon as they came around from the far side of the moon. This is the sequence. This is my effort to show what a normal Earthrise would look like, which we've seen on some of the missions because they had different angles, different orbits. They weren't looking through the glass. It's not everywhere, it turns out. It's only some places. But this is the actual Apollo 10 sequence. As it rose, notice it's flat on top, it's whacked off on this side, and it's round over here. As it gets higher and higher, the distortion gets less and less. Again, totally consistent with a real object being viewed through miles and miles of optically thin, but still active refractive glass. This is a comparison of moonrise taken by Skylab through the Earth's atmosphere. The moon, of course, because of the differential refractive properties of the gas around the Earth, acts like a lens, is refracting differentially, so the moon appears kind of stubby and like a football when it's very close to the Earth's surface, the horizon, and as it rises higher and the density of the air gets less, the distortion gets less. Well, exactly the same effect, except notice that this is a spherical, symmetrical distortion, and this is not. This indicates there's a geometry to the refracting medium, and that geometry is basically what is giving us the geometric aspects of what we're seeing. Now this is the end of the film. This is where the 60mm film that he was talking about, the so-called gun camera footage, was turned off. The camera was turned off mechanically, and then the film comes to a stop. As it did, it exposed things longer and longer and longer. And finally, you can see as the film slowed down and stopped, it increased in exposure. Now you're seeing the layers, you're seeing, and then finally when it stopped, you're seeing the jagged meteor bombarded upper surface of this dome-like structure, and you can see the Earth distorted through the lower layers of this glass dome. Here's a full screen version. I mean, this is just, and this is available on the film. The actual film still available through NSSDC. We can point you through Bobby Tice, who's the manager of the National Space Science Data Center, to exactly what film to order, what film to look at now on video or various digital processing techniques. You will find exactly the same thing. What Feartech did was do a ray trace diagram based on his model, calculated the effect on distorting an object rising through it, and lo and behold, he gets this symmetrical, lopsided effect, exactly like what we're seeing on the real data. Here's another view taken on Apollo 16 on the lunar far side. Earth color, Earth rising as it's coming around. Here is an enhanced version. Notice that you have an incredible light scattering and refraction around the Earth and along the lunar horizon just below the rising Earth, indicating this is basically little micro-lensing of the image of the Earth because of the the refracting angle of the glass. We can actually do physics here and calculate the index of refraction, knowing the distance of the horizon, the size of the Earth, how far above and number of degrees it is. The Earth is about 2 degrees wide, seen from the moon. So you can actually back engineer the properties of this glass-like dome. And again, this data is available if you simply order these frames from the National Space Science Data Center. And if you have any problems, talk to us, because we've been there. We know how to get through the system. We know how to get the actual samples, and we can give you hints on how to enhance it so you can see what is there. Which brings me, in conclusion, to the most amazing mission, which was the final mission to the moon, Apollo 17. Apollo 17 landed in the Taurus Littrow Valley at 19.5 degrees. This is one of the objects that they wanted to explore, something called South Massive. This is the actual landing site. They took the lunar rover, they rode over here, they rode up to here, they went over here to the North Massive. It took them 3 days. This is what we've been shown of the lunar landscape as seen from Apollo 17. This is not the real moon. This is not what they really saw. Watch. This is an area called Vitruvius. This is an unnamed object sitting in front several miles from the lunar module. As we get closer, you'll see that it has a very peculiar geometry on the surface. In fact, it seems to be a lunar arcology with lattice-like rooms and cubical architecture very well preserved. It looks an awful lot like this, except this in a battered form. Remember Bucky Fuller and his geodesic domes? This is a color version. Again, notice the interesting highlights in color. Why isn't it just dead gray? Why does it have interesting color? Well, we'll get to that in a second. Then we go back to this man. This was the man who took that picture, and a whole bunch of other pictures. Gene Cernan, commander of Apollo 17. Why, when the president is saying we're finally going back, which Gene has been asking for decades, that this nation commit itself to returning men and women to the moon, why does he look like it's the worst day of his life? And why is the guy next to him looking at him like, what in the world is wrong with you? I think it's because of this. This is back to Vitruvius. This is now a wider angle view. Here's our arcology. Here's the background mountain. That's the NASA view that you've been shown all these years. I'm going to show you now the real version that was secretly slipped to us by means of a website halfway around the world in Italy a few weeks ago.